paramedic kneels beside a stranger crumpled on the pavement. The sirens have quieted. The medical work is done. There's nothing left but time. A few slow breaths, a faltering pulse, and the inevitability of what comes next. And yet, as machines beep and chaos hums at the edge of the moment, the paramedic does something not found in any training manual. He reaches out and gently holds the stranger's hand. There's no physiological necessity, no textbook directive, no chance this gesture will change the outcome. But still, he does it, and something curious happens. The stranger's heart rate slows, their breathing eases. A subtle calm settles into the room, like the body, even in its final chapter, recognizes that it is not alone. Why does this happen? Why would something as simple and as soft as kindness create a measurable change inside the human body? We often think of compassion as emotional, maybe even spiritual, a moral choice. But what if kindness isn't just an abstract virtue? What if it's a biological signal, one that moves through our blood, our cells, our chemistry, quietly but powerfully, changing not just how we feel, but how we function? Could a single act of kindness shift the balance of your hormones in real time? Could it lower your blood pressure, ease your pain, or strengthen your immune system? And deeper still, when a kind act occurs, who is really being healed? The one receiving it bathed in warmth and attention, or the one giving it, whose body may quietly flood with chemicals of reward, trust, and peace? This isn't a metaphor, it's a physiological reality. The science of kindness, from oxytocin surges to vagus nerve activation, reveals something profound. Our biology seems wired for compassion, not just as a moral code, but as a survival mechanism. And in a world that often prizes strength over softness, this discovery raises a quietly revolutionary idea. What if kindness is not weakness? What if it is power in its most ancient biochemical form? Kindness, long cherished as a moral virtue, is now revealing itself as something far more elemental, a biological force woven deep into the human body. At the center of this hidden science is a humble but powerful molecule, oxytocin, often called the love hormone. Oxytocin is best known for its role in childbirth and maternal bonding, but its influence stretches far beyond the nursery. It plays a pivotal role in building trust, deepening social bonds, regulating heart rate, aiding digestion, and even accelerating wound healing. It is a molecule of connection, one that tells the body you are safe here. But oxytocin doesn't work alone. Kindness triggers a cascade of neurochemical changes. Serotonin, the neurotransmitter most commonly associated with mood regulation, rises with compassionate behavior, lifting not just spirits, but also stabilizing emotional health. Endorphins, the brain's natural painkillers, are released during generous or altruistic acts, offering physical relief and a quiet euphoria. Dopamine, the reward chemical, reinforces kindness by lighting up the brain's pleasure centers, making generosity feel deeply satisfying. And all the while, the vagus nerve, a major player in the parasympathetic nervous system, activates in response to compassionate interaction, slowing the heart, calming the breath, and fostering a physiological sense of human connection. These responses aren't random. They're part of a deeply coordinated biological system that seems evolutionarily tuned for cooperation. And while this might sound like a modern medical revelation, the roots of this wisdom run deep. In ancient Hindu texts, kindness was declared the highest dharma, the noblest path. In Confucianism, kindness formed the foundation of social harmony. Across indigenous traditions, spiritual philosophies, and sacred teachings, compassion was elevated as a supreme human quality. But perhaps these ideas weren't merely moral aspirations. Maybe they were intuitive recognitions of something we're only now beginning to prove in laboratories, that kindness changes the body, that it heals, regulates, and connects. Today, in the age of chronic stress, social fragmentation, and digital overload, this ancient wisdom is echoing back with scientific urgency. We live in a world where loneliness has become epidemic, where burnout is so common it's normalized. And amid this disconnection, kindness is emerging as a biological antidote. Psychologists now speak of a biobehavioral feedback loop, a self-reinforcing cycle in which compassionate actions improve our biology, which in turn makes us more capable of compassion. It's a healing circuit built into the human nervous system, and it's becoming increasingly clear that kindness isn't just good, it's vital. But this realization brings with it a sharper truth. If kindness regulates biology, then cruelty, neglect, and indifference must do the opposite. They aren't just emotional injuries, they become physical ones. Social exclusion can elevate inflammation. Chronic stress from unkind environments can damage immune function, impair digestion, and worsen heart health. The absence of compassion doesn't just affect our mood, it can dysregulate the entire body. This isn't speculative, it's measurable, and the implications are profound. Because if our bodies are biologically wired for connection, then a society that neglects kindness, in homes, in workplaces, in schools, is a society that is quite literally making itself sick. This is no longer just a philosophical or ethical issue. It's a public health emergency. And the cure, as ancient as it is scientifically urgent, begins with one gentle, undeniable truth. Kindness is medicine. In 2005, a team of researchers set out to study stress, but what they uncovered was something far more astonishing. During a controlled experiment, participants were asked to perform a stressful task, but this time, some were given the opportunity to offer support to others undergoing the same experience. The results defied expectation. Those who gave support, not just received it, had significantly lower levels of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. At the same time, their oxytocin levels rose, calming their nervous systems and boosting feelings of connection. Even more remarkably, immune markers in their blood improved, suggesting that their bodies were literally entering a more resilient state. They weren't just feeling better, their biology was changing in real time. Kindness, in this context, wasn't just good, it was medicinal. But this discovery raised a deeper question. From an evolutionary standpoint, why would such a system exist? Why would nature reward behavior that, on the surface, seems self-sacrificing? Why should organisms benefit biologically from helping others, especially when doing so may come at a personal cost? Traditional evolutionary logic suggests that behaviors favoring individual survival should be prioritized. Yet here we see the opposite. Kindness, generosity, even empathy, triggering biological advantages. This is the contradiction, because if evolution is about survival of the fittest, then why does biology seem to favor the kind? The twist is both elegant and unsettling. Kindness, it turns out, isn't truly selfless. It's deeply adaptive. Neuroscientists found that acts of giving activate the same reward circuits in the brain as food, sex, or addictive drugs, including regions like the ventral striatum and medial prefrontal cortex. The body treats kindness like a pleasure. It floods the brain with dopamine and oxytocin, creating a feedback loop that encourages us to do it again. In other words, your body wants you to be kind, not because it's noble, but because it's useful. Cooperation, after all, is one of the most powerful forces in evolution. A lone human is vulnerable, but a connected group, one that shares, protects, and supports, has a vastly higher chance of surviving, reproducing, and thriving. So nature doesn't just permit kindness, it reinforces it. And this leads us to a strange and fascinating paradox. Is altruism, the very symbol of selflessness, actually rooted in self-interest? If our brains reward us for helping others because it boosts our own survival chances, is kindness still noble? Or is it just biology playing a trick, wrapping cooperation in the warm glow of emotion to ensure its own continuation? Perhaps the answer is both. Maybe the beauty of kindness is that it doesn't need to choose between virtue and survival. It is one of those rare evolutionary phenomena where what feels good, what seems right, and what helps us endure all point in the same direction. Still, the question lingers. If the science of kindness is ultimately about what benefits us, does it take away from its moral power, or does it deepen it, proving that, in the architecture of life itself, compassion isn't an accessory, but a foundation? If kindness is driven by hormones, if compassion, generosity, and connection are orchestrated by biochemical signals like oxytocin and dopamine, then it opens the door to a troubling question. Can kindness be controlled? Can it be hacked, manipulated, or even manufactured? In an age of neuroscience-informed advertising and emotionally optimized algorithms, we already see signs that the answer may be yes. Corporations increasingly lean into what they call purpose-driven branding themselves to causes, movements, or emotional stories, not only to do good, but to feel good in the public's mind. They know that an act of generosity, even if symbolic, can activate our empathy circuits. Oxytocin rises, dopamine flows. A positive association is formed not just with the story, but with the brand behind it. In this sense, kindness becomes a tool, a product, a mechanism not for healing society, but for boosting sales. And still, even beyond the boardroom, questions persist. Can a single act of kindness repair years of emotional injury? Can it reach down and unbraid the scars left by abandonment, betrayal, or violence? Neuroscience suggests kindness has therapeutic potential, boosting neuroplasticity, softening the stress response, and even changing how the brain encodes fear. But trauma is its own biological force. It reshapes the amygdala, hijacks the nervous system, and encodes distrust in every cell. For someone who's been hurt again and again, an unexpected kindness can feel more threatening than comforting. The body flinches, unsure if what it's receiving is real or just the start of another manipulation. In that fragile space between giving and receiving, the limits of kindness begin to show, and yet history complicates the picture. In the darkest moments of human cruelty, kindness has sometimes shone brightest. During World War II, there were soldiers who risked their lives not to kill, but to shield. Prisoners who shared their last piece of bread. Families who hid strangers in basements, knowing discovery meant death. In the 1994 Rwandan genocide, some villagers defied orders, hiding their neighbors' people they were told to hate, people they'd grown up beside. These weren't grand political gestures. They were intimate acts of risk, of compassion. Were these people simply moral outliers, saints? Or might their biology have been different, wired for empathy more deeply than most? Did they feel kindness more strongly, resist fear more effectively? Or were they, like all of us, just caught in the moment and chose, somehow, to be human in a way that rewrote the rules? Today, we're beginning to realize that the stakes of kindness are not just personal, they are societal. Loneliness is now officially classified as a public health epidemic. Chronic social isolation increases the risk of premature death by 26%, putting it on par with smoking or obesity. And in response, institutions are experimenting with kindness as a form of intervention. In prisons, empathy training has been shown to reduce violence. In hospitals, small acts of compassion between staff and patients improve healing outcomes. In therapy, kindness toward others and toward oneself is increasingly recognized as a tool for rewiring the nervous system, for interrupting cycles of shame and despair. Kindness, in other words, is being medicalized, prescribed, but even medicine has shadows. Oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, doesn't simply open the heart, can also draw a line. Studies show that oxytocin increases in-group trust and bonding, but often reduces trust toward perceived outsiders. It doesn't just promote empathy, it sharpens boundaries. In this way, kindness can be tribal. It can be partial. We may feel generous to those who look like us, believe what we believe, or share our values but turn cold, even hostile, to those outside that imagined circle. Kindness, then, has a dark edge. It builds bridges, yes, but also walls. This is the paradox at the heart of it all. Kindness may be the most powerful force for connection we possess, yet it can also divide. It can heal, but also exclude. It can elevate the human spirit or be twisted into propaganda, performance, or manipulation. As we uncover more of its biological mechanics, we must also wrestle with its ethical consequences. Is kindness still kindness if it's driven by reward? Can it still be called compassion if it's only extended inward, toward those we already love? And if kindness can be engineered by a company, a chemical, or a campaign, where does authenticity live? In a world starving for connection, these questions matter more than ever. Because kindness, for all its softness, is not a fragile thing. It is powerful, and like anything powerful, it must be handled with care. After everything, the chemistry, the history, the paradox's one final realization rises from the science. Kindness rewires the brain, not metaphorically, but literally. Long-term acts of compassion, especially those repeated over weeks or months, lead to measurable structural changes in the brain. Most notably, the temporoparietal junction, a region associated with empathy, perspective-taking, and moral reasoning, grows in density. Functional MRI scans show that people who engage in regular, compassionate acts have more neural activity in the areas responsible for emotional regulation, social cognition, and even physical pain management. It's as if the brain, through kindness, becomes more human, more attuned, more connected. But then comes the twist and insight, so profound it reframes everything. The brain doesn't actually distinguish between giving kindness and witnessing it. You don't have to donate, volunteer, or hug a stranger to receive the physiological benefits. Just seeing someone perform a generous act, watching a nurse comfort a patient, or a stranger help someone across the street can trigger the same neurochemical response as doing it yourself. Oxytocin rises, cortisol drops, the vagus nerve engages, even your heart rate variability can shift, subtly aligning with the rhythms of empathy. This is what scientists call moral elevation. the warm, almost euphoric sensation of witnessing goodness. In that moment, the brain is changed. Witnessing kindness isn't passive. It's participatory. It's biological. But then, just as quickly, the other side reveals itself. Kindness, if overextended, can backfire. Nurses and social workers, often the very people most engaged in daily acts of compassion, are some of the most vulnerable to compassion fatigue. They report higher rates of burnout, depression, and even physical illness. Their brains wired for empathy can become overwhelmed by the emotional weight of constant giving. The same applies to children who care for ill parents, or adults who suppress their own needs for the sake of others. When kindness becomes chronic self-sacrifice, the body begins to break, sleep suffers, inflammation rises. The vagus nerve, once a conduit of calm, starts to misfire. Even oxytocin, if chronically stimulated without reciprocal care, can dysregulate emotional boundaries, and so we arrive at the true complexity of kindness. It is not infinite. It requires balance. Biologically, we are not wired for endless giving without replenishment. To little kindness, and we fall into isolation, distrust, and physiological decline. But too much forward without rest, without reciprocity, leads to collapse. The optimal zone, it turns out, is somewhere in between. Not selfless, not selfish, but sustainable. Kindness, when practiced with intention and boundaries, builds resilience. It strengthens immune function, nurtures social bonds, and deepens emotional regulation. It becomes a feedback loop of connection both to others and to ourselves. This is the twist we rarely hear. Kindness isn't just about what you give. It's about how it moves through you, how it flows in both directions. Compassion isn't a virtue to deplete yourself with. It's a rhythm, a biology, a cycle, one that, when honored, doesn't just change the brain. It protects the heart. It shapes a life. After decades of research, science has begun to crystallize a truth that human cultures have long intuited. Kindness is not just a moral decision, but a biological act. When you engage in an act of kindness, whether it's offering help, listening with care, or simply making eye contact with compassion, a powerful physiological cascade is triggered. Oxytocin, often the first responder, floods the bloodstream, softening emotional defenses and enhancing social trust. This surge activates the vagus nerve, the body's central brake on stress. Heart rate slows, inflammation decreases, blood vessels relax. Over time, this cascade leads to measurable improvements in cardiovascular health, immune function, and emotional resilience. It's a biological symphony, all initiated by something as small and subtle as human goodness. But the science goes even deeper. Just as regular physical exercise strengthens muscle and cardiovascular endurance, consistent acts of kindness strengthen the brain. Functional imaging shows that people who regularly engage in compassion through meditation, service, or emotional care develop enhanced neural connections in regions linked to empathy, emotion, regulation, and perspective taking. This insight forms the foundation of compassion training. Programs now being used across diverse fields, from elementary schools and trauma therapy to leadership seminars and even military training. These programs teach not just mindfulness or positivity, but the deliberate cultivation of kindness as a mental discipline. The results? Increased resilience under stress, improved emotional intelligence, and greater overall well-being. Crucially, the acts don't need to be grand. Micro-kindness, those fleeting gestures like holding open a door, sending a kind message, or saying thank you with real intention, or surprisingly potent. Even the smallest acts can shift your hormonal landscape. What's more, kindness doesn't always have to be synchronous or reciprocal to be effective. You might offer compassion today and feel its effects tomorrow. You might witness a kind act and still receive the physiological reward, and the cumulative effect. Days, weeks, years is profound. The body begins to expect safety. The nervous system the immune system learns to thrive in connection at its deepest level. Kindness is not just something you feel, it's something you become. It is a neurochemical state of openness, safety, and attunement that alters not just how you treat others, but how your own body functions. It's a state of offering, not just to the world, but to your own biology. And in a culture often driven by performance, productivity, and fear, this understanding shifts the paradigm. Kindness is not weakness. It's not naivety. It's not just good behavior. It is fundamentally a biological technology for survival, and flourish in an internal compass that, when followed, creates measurable change in the fabric of life itself. This is the clarity science now offers. Kindness is not a fleeting mood or optional virtue. It is a biologically encoded strategy for health, connection, and resilience. Each act, no matter how small, is not wasted. It echoes in your cells, it reshapes your brain, and it lives in the quiet physiology of everyone it touches. The fluorescent lights hum softly above her. It's well past midnight. The ward has gone still, save for the low chorus of monitors and the quiet shuffle of shoes on linoleum. A nurse, bone-tired and aching from 12 hours on her feet, pauses beside a patient's bed. There's no urgent medical need. The chart has been updated. The medications are done. But something draws her to stay. She gently reaches out and takes the patient's hand, not because protocol requires it, not because anyone will see, but because, in that quiet moment, she wants to. The patient, too weak to speak, stirs slightly, then settles. On the monitor, something changes. The patient's heart rate, once erratic, softens into a slower, steadier rhythm. The nurse's own pulse, elevated from hours of rushing between crises, begins to calm. Their bodies, two entirely separate systems, synchronize for just a moment. Two rhythms. One, kindness. We often think of hormones as mechanical automatic messengers responding to food, fear, or fatigue. But what if they're not just reactive? What if they're responsive? What if they're listening not to words, but to intention? To the tone of a voice, the presence of a hand, the feeling behind an act. Oxytocin doesn't rise in a vacuum. The vagus nerve doesn't activate without reason. These systems respond to something more ancient and subtle. The way we treat one another, maybe. Kindness isn't a side effect of humanity. Maybe it is humanity written in chemical code, passed down over millions of years, not as a weakness to outgrow, but as the signal of life lived in connection. It's not soft, it's not small. It's a force that moves through blood, nerves, and breath, strengthening the heart, calming the brain, and binding the fragile architecture of trust between us. And in the end, maybe it's not the big gestures that define us. Maybe it's the quiet ones, the moments no one sees. A word of patience, a held door, a steady hand in the dark. Each one leaves a trace, not just in memory, but in the body. The hormones shift, the nervous system adjusts, the immune cells. Remember, in a world full of noise, power, and fear, kindness is the quiet signal, that the body remembers love.